The arrival, hook and suspense, emerging empire. The doors of the Galactic Senate chamber slammed open. A heavy silence fell over the vast hall. Hundreds of alien delegates, seated in their floating platforms, turned their attention toward the entrance. A single figure stepped through. It was a human. They walked forward with slow, measured steps, boots echoing across the polished floor. The chamber was enormous, built to house beings of all shapes and sizes, from the towering Zyraxian overlords to the small insectoid Click-Thar. But at that moment, all eyes were on the lone human. In their right hand, they held something that sent shockwaves through the room. A crown. It was no ordinary crown. It was made of blackened steel, its edges still slick with dark stains. Some recognized it instantly. It belonged to the fallen emperor of the Drakthar Dominion, a warlord who had ruled through fear and fire for nearly a century. The moment the human placed the crown on the floor, the Senate chamber erupted. Gasps, shouts, a mix of fear, anger, and confusion filled the air. The High Chancellor of the Galactic Council, an ancient reptilian with glimmering emerald scales, rose from his seat. His voice, cold and sharp, cut through the noise like a blade. "Human," he hissed. "Explain yourself. What madness is this?" The human did not react to his anger. They stood tall, scanning the chamber as if weighing each species present. Finally, they spoke, voice calm yet firm. "The Drakthar Emperor is dead," the human said. Silence fell again. The weight of those words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Some senators looked at one another, as if waiting for confirmation. Others stared at the crown, unable to believe what they were hearing. "The Drakthar, fallen," whispered a Click-Thar delegate, their antennae twitching. "Lies," bellowed a massive, tusked warrior from the Torgith clans. His 3 crimson eyes glowed with fury. "The Dominion is unstoppable. You expect us to believe that a single human world could bring them down." The human did not flinch. Instead, they took another step forward. "You will believe it," they said, "because it happened." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some aliens whispered to their aides, activating hidden communication devices, likely demanding updates from their spies. Others merely stared in shock. The Drakthar Dominion had been one of the strongest forces in the galaxy. Their fleets had burned entire civilizations to the ground. Their warriors were bio-enhanced monsters, designed for endless war. And yet, here stood a human, holding proof of their destruction. The Velen ambassador, a tall, silver-skinned humanoid with glowing blue eyes, leaned forward. Unlike the others, she did not look angry. She looked curious. "Tell us how," she said, her voice smooth, almost calculating. The human met her gaze but did not answer immediately. They let the tension build, allowing the weight of their presence to settle deeper into the minds of every delegate. Finally, they spoke. "They came to conquer Earth," the human said. "They thought we were weak. They thought we would kneel." A sharp breath from the crowd. They were wrong. For a brief second, no one spoke. The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Then, a voice, harsh, filled with rage, shattered the moment. A Drakthar warlord, one of the last remaining high generals of the Dominion, rose to his feet. His exoskeletal armor gleamed under the artificial light of the chamber, his claws twitching in anger. "You expect us to believe that your kind, a species barely crawling into the stars, defeated our emperor." He snarled. His deep, guttural voice was laced with venom. "This is nothing but human arrogance." The human finally turned to face him directly. "Is it?" they asked. Their voice was steady, eyes locked onto the warlord. "Then tell me, why isn't your emperor here to silence me?" The warlord froze. The chamber grew deathly quiet. For the first time, true fear flickered in the Drakthar's reptilian eyes. The human took one last step forward, standing at the center of the Senate floor. Their presence alone sent a message, not just of power, but of certainty. "This is not arrogance," the human said, their voice as unyielding as stone. "This is fact." They gestured to the crown resting on the polished floor. "And this is proof." The room exploded in noise, some yelling in disbelief, others frantically whispering amongst themselves. Some species looked terrified, while others seemed intrigued. But one thing was clear: the galactic balance had shifted, and humanity had arrived. The reaction. The Galactic Senate was in chaos. The moment the humans' words settled in the air, the chamber erupted. Some alien delegates shouted in disbelief, their voices overlapping in a tangled mess of anger and fear. Others frantically whispered, their communication devices buzzing as they tried to verify the impossible news. The Drakthar warlord Kavar, still standing, trembled with rage. His clawed hands twitched as if resisting the urge to strike down the human where they stood. "This is treason," he bellowed, his deep voice shaking the chamber. "The Dominion will burn your world to ash for this insult." The human tilted their head slightly, as if considering his words. Then they bent down and picked up the crown once more. They turned it slowly in their hands, letting the blood-stained metal catch the light. "You don't seem to understand," the human said, voice steady. "There is no Dominion anymore." The words hit like a shockwave. The chamber fell into a stunned silence. A senator from the Clicthar hive clicked their mandibles in unease. "No Dominion. Impossible. Even if the Emperor has fallen, the fleets still remain." The human met their many-eyed gaze without hesitation. "Their fleets are broken," they said. "Their generals are dead. Their warriors leaderless. What remains of the Dominion is running, hiding, or surrendering." A heavy silence followed. Some delegates sat frozen, processing the words. Others began murmuring, doubt creeping into their voices. The Drakthar had ruled through fear for generations. If they had truly fallen, then the power structure of the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The Xerexian High Chancellor took a slow, measured breath. His cold, reptilian eyes studied the human as if trying to see into their soul. "If this is true," he said carefully, "then humanity has upset the delicate balance of this galaxy." The human gave a small shrug. "It wasn't very balanced if a warlord could invade planets at will," they replied. The Velen ambassador, still watching with quiet interest, suddenly leaned forward. "And tell us, human," she said, her voice smooth, "if the Dominion is truly gone, what comes next?" The question hung in the air, and the weight of it was clear. The old order had been shattered. The Drakthar were no longer at the top. But someone, had to take their place. Would it be humanity? The human paused for a moment, then took a slow step forward, placing the blood-stained crown onto the center of the Senate floor once more. "We did not come here to claim a throne," they said. "We came to deliver a message." Some senators leaned in, waiting. Others looked wary. The human's eyes swept the chamber, their voice carrying both warning and promise. "Earth will not be ruled." They let the words settle. "We do not seek conquest," they continued. "But if any other empire wishes to test us, you will end like the Drakthar." The air was thick with tension. Some delegates visibly shuddered. Others narrowed their eyes, considering their next move. The human wasn't making a threat. They were stating a fact. The Drakthar warlord Kavar slammed a clawed fist onto his platform. His face twisted in fury. But there was something else in his expression. For the first time, there was fear. "You will regret this," he hissed. The human simply smiled. "We'll see." The Galactic Senate had been shaken to its core. The balance of power was shifting, and humanity had just declared its place among the stars. The truth revealed. A heavy silence settled over the Senate chamber. The human's words lingered in the air, pressing down on the gathered delegates like an unseen force. Some stared at the blood-stained crown, still resting on the Senate floor. Others locked eyes with the human, trying to gauge the depth of their confidence. The Xerexian High Chancellor finally broke the silence, his scaled hands folded together, his expression calculating. "You claim the Dominion is gone," he said slowly, his voice even. That its fleets are broken, its leaders dead. And yet, we have heard nothing of this before today. How did humanity, a species barely known to the wider galaxy, defeat an empire that has stood for centuries? The human gave a slow, deliberate nod. You want the truth, they said. Then listen carefully. All eyes remained on them as they took another step forward, standing at the very center of the Senate chamber. The Drakthar came to conquer Earth, the human began. They sent their fleets, their warships, their soldiers. They thought they would crush us in days. A few senators exchanged glances, their doubt evident. The Drakthar had always been known for their brutality. Their conquests were swift and merciless. The human's voice remained steady. But they made a mistake, they continued. They believed we would break, that we would submit. Their eyes swept the room, locking onto each alien leader. They didn't know us. A ripple of unease moved through the chamber. They thought they were fighting another weak species, another world that would fold under their might, the human said. But we are not weak, and we do not kneel. The Velen ambassador studied them carefully. So you fought back. We did more than fight back, the human corrected. We hunted them. We learned their tactics. We studied their weaknesses, and when the time came, we turned their own weapons against them. A murmur ran through the assembly. They tried to destroy our cities, the human continued, voice firm. So we wiped out their invasion forces. They tried to break our spirits, so we showed them the cost of their war. Their voice hardened. They believed they were the hunters, they said. But we made them realize they were the prey. The chamber grew deathly quiet. Even Warlord Kovar, who had been burning with rage moments ago, now looked uncertain. His claws flexed, his jaw clenched. The Drakthar had always believed themselves superior, but if what the human was saying was true, it meant they had underestimated an entire species. It meant they had lost because they were not prepared for humanity's way of war. The Xeraxian High Chancellor narrowed his eyes. You claim victory, but victory often comes at a cost. How many of your kind died? The human's expression did not change. Enough. A few senators scoffed, unsatisfied with the answer. But the Velen ambassador seemed more intrigued than ever. And the Emperor, she asked, how did you kill him? The human's lips curled slightly, a hint of something cold flickering in their eyes. When their fleets burned, when their armies were scattered, he ran, they said. He fled back to his throne world, believing he was safe behind his walls, believing that his empire would still stand. The human's gaze darkened. But we were already there, waiting for him. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Even the most skeptical senators were now listening intently. The human continued. Our forces breached his citadel. His warriors fought to their last breath. But it didn't matter. He tried to escape, tried to find refuge among his own kind. Their fingers tightened around the crown. But no one came for him. His empire had abandoned him. For a moment, no one spoke. The human lifted the crown slightly, letting the light catch the deep scars and cracks across its surface. And so, they finished. I took this, the symbol of his power, the proof of his end. The Klikthar delegate clicked his mandibles nervously. And now you bring it here. To tell us what? That humanity will take his place. The human's expression remained unreadable. We did not come here to claim a throne, they repeated. We came to deliver a warning. They placed the crown back on the floor, stepping away from it. To those who see this as an opportunity, to those who think humanity is now vulnerable, that we are exhausted from war, I say this. Their voice dropped lower, but somehow it carried through the chamber with even greater force. Try us. A chill spread through the room. The threat was clear. The Drakthar were gone, and humanity had not only survived the war, they had emerged stronger than before. The Senate was no longer dealing with a minor species. They were dealing with a force that had destroyed an empire. The galactic balance had changed, and every alien in the room knew it. The threat. A deep, uneasy silence filled the Galactic Senate chamber. The humans' words lingered like an open wound, a stark reminder that the universe had changed. Some senators sat frozen. Others whispered among themselves, their minds racing through the implications. The Drakthar were no more. And humanity, the species they had barely acknowledged before, had risen as a force that could shatter an empire. Then the silence was broken. A loud snarl echoed through the chamber. The massive, armored form of Warlord Kavar loomed over the assembly, his reptilian eyes burning with fury. His claws dug into the metal of his platform, his nostrils flaring. "You expect us to believe this," he growled. "That your kind, your fragile, primitive world, was able to destroy the greatest war machine in the galaxy." His voice dripped with contempt, but beneath his rage, there was something else. Fear. The human met his gaze without hesitation. Their expression did not change. Their posture did not shift. They were not intimidated. "You don't have to believe it," the human said. "But the truth doesn't care about your beliefs." A murmur spread through the room. Some of the smaller empires in the Senate exchanged worried glances, their own survival instincts kicking in. If humanity could crush the Drakthar, what did that mean for the rest of them? Kavar's clawed hand slammed down on his podium, the force causing a deep dent in the metal. "This is a lie," he roared. "Humanity has not won anything. The Dominion still lives. The fleets still exist. And if your kind believes for even a second that you are beyond our reach—" He stopped mid-sentence, because the human laughed. Not a loud, mocking laugh, but a quiet, knowing chuckle. Kavar's eyes narrowed. "What's so funny?" he spat. The humans shook their head, still smiling. "You talk about the Dominion," they said, "but look around you, Warlord." Kavar's nostrils flared again, his breath heavy and sharp. "You stand here alone," the human continued, taking the slow step forward. "Your emperor is gone. Your fleets are scattered. Your armies have no leader. Your throne world is in ruins." Kavar's claws twitched. "If the Dominion still lives," the human said, their voice turning cold, "then where are they now?" A deathly silence followed. The Drakthar had always boasted of their strength. Their warriors had never backed down. Their fleets had never retreated. But now, not a single one had come to Kavar's defense, because there was no one left to defend him. The warlord's breath grew heavier. His mind raced. He wanted to deny it, to claim that humanity was lying. But deep down, he already knew the truth. His people were gone. The Velen ambassador, ever watchful, spoke next. "If what the human says is true," she mused, "then the Drakthar are no longer a major force." Which means, her glowing blue eyes turned toward the rest of the Senate. "There is an open power vacuum." The air in the chamber grew thicker with tension. Empires rose and fell on power vacuums, and without the Drakthar in control, the galactic order had become unstable. Some of the smaller factions in the Senate perked up at the thought. An opportunity to seize new territory, to grow their influence. But others saw humanity as the biggest threat in the room. A senator from the Torgith clans, his tusked face twisted in anger, slammed his fist onto his control panel. "You dare come here and challenge the Order of the Stars," he growled. "If your species believes that this victory makes you untouchable, you are gravely mistaken." Another senator, a member of the Xalveric Union, hissed. "We tolerated your kind before, but now, you think you can stand among us as equals." The human let them finish. Then they spoke again, softly, but with undeniable weight. "I did not come here to ask for permission." The words cut through the noise, sharper than any weapon. The senators froze. The human stepped forward, voice unwavering. "We are not here to beg for recognition," they said. "We are not here to request a seat at your table." Their gaze swept the room, eyes locking onto each species, each leader who had once dismissed humanity as nothing more than an afterthought. "We came here to warn you." Another ripple of unease moved through the chamber. "Warn us of what?" the Xerexian chancellor asked cautiously. The human's expression darkened. "The Drakthar thought we were weak, that they could invade our world, burn our cities, break our people." They paused, then spoke their next words with absolute finality. "And now they no longer exist." A chill swept through the room. The message was clear. Those who sought to dominate humanity would share the same fate. Kevar's claws flexed again. His mind was at war with itself. He wanted to rage, to fight, to strike this human down, but he could not ignore the truth standing before him. He had lost. The balance of power had changed, and humanity had made their place in the galaxy, not through diplomacy, but through fire and war. The Senate chamber was no longer filled with mockery or dismissive whispers. Now, there was only silence, because every empire, every leader in that room, had the same terrifying realization. The Drakthar were only the first, and if any of them made the same mistake, humanity would make sure they were the last. The threat continued. The Galactic Senate chamber was no longer just a hall of diplomacy. It had become a battleground of unspoken fears and shifting alliances. The human had delivered their message, and now the Senate had to decide what to do about it. Some of the alien leaders sat in deep silence, their minds racing with calculations. How had humanity done this? How had a species so young in the stars crushed an empire that had ruled for centuries? But others, those who ruled through force, through control, saw humanity as an infection that needed to be eradicated immediately. A deep voice, heavy with contempt, rumbled through the chamber. "You should not have come here, human." All eyes turned toward the Xalveric warlord, a hulking figure clad in crimson war armor. His species, the Xalveric, were known for their ruthlessness, their conquests leaving entire civilizations in ruins. He was one of the few who had openly respected the Drakthar, even admired them. Now, their fall had left a power vacuum, one he clearly intended to fill. "You claim to be warriors," the warlord growled, his golden eyes narrowing. "But you are nothing more than a species of desperate killers. You do not belong here." The human turned to face him, expression unreadable. "You say that," they replied, "but your kind never had the courage to challenge the Drakthar. We did." A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. The warlord's nostrils flared, his mandibles twitching. "You act as if your war was a show of strength. But I see it for what it truly was, a gamble. You won, not because you are strong, but because you are reckless. And now you stand here, expecting us to fear you." The human tilted their head slightly. "I don't expect anything," they said. "I simply know what will happen next." The warlord's clawed fingers dug into the metal of his platform. "And what is that?" The human's eyes hardened. "Someone will come for us," they said. "Maybe you, maybe someone else. There will always be another empire that believes they can do what the Drakthar could not." They took one step forward, voice cold as steel. "And when that day comes, we will bury them too." The room fell silent again. This was not bravado. This was not an empty threat. This was a promise. The Xerexian High Chancellor, who had been studying the human carefully, exhaled slowly. "You speak as though your people are prepared for another war." The human let out a breath of quiet amusement. "Prepared," they said. "We never stopped fighting." The warlord let out a low, rumbling growl, his muscles tensing. His rage was palpable. His species did not tolerate defiance. And yet, here stood a single human, showing no fear, no hesitation. It was infuriating. The warlord leaned forward, eyes glowing with anger. "I should kill you where you stand," he snarled. The human smiled. "You could try." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the chamber. This was it, the moment where words could turn to violence, where diplomacy could collapse into war. For a long moment, No one moved. Then the warlord let out a low guttural snarl, a sign of barely contained fury. But he did not attack. Because despite his rage, despite his hatred, he knew the truth. If humanity had been strong enough to end the Drakthar, they were strong enough to fight back against anyone else. And for all his anger, the warlord was not a fool. He turned away, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "This is not over." The human nodded once. "No, it isn't." The warlord sat back down, his claws flexing against the armrest of his throne. He would not forget this. None of them would. The balance of power had shifted, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The unexpected ally. The weight of tension hung heavy in the Senate chamber. The warlord's final threat still echoed in the air, but no one else spoke. For a long moment, the Galactic Senate remained divided. Some species afraid, others angry, and many calculating their next move. And then, a voice broke the silence. "I, for one, think humanity has earned its place." Every head turned sharply toward the speaker. Seated among the mid-tier factions was a delegation from the Velen Republic. Their ambassador, a tall, silver-skinned figure with glowing blue eyes, rose to her feet. Unlike the others, she did not look at the human with fear or hatred. She looked at them with curiosity and something else. Respect. The murmurs rose again, this time in shock. The Velen Republic had never supported the Drakthar, but they also avoided conflict. They were known as strategists, diplomats, and opportunists, a species that never acted unless it benefited them. For them to publicly support humanity now, this was no small thing. The Xeraxian High Chancellor narrowed his eyes. "Ambassador Kelia," he said, voice careful, "do you truly mean to suggest that the Velen Republic stands with humanity?" The Velen ambassador smiled faintly. "I mean to suggest," she said, "that the fall of the Drakthar has left an empty throne in the Galactic Order, one that many of you are already considering filling." A few of the more ambitious factions flinched at her words. "But," she continued, "none of you stopped the Drakthar. None of you challenged them. None of you had the strength or courage to break their grip on the galaxy." She gestured toward the human. They did. The murmurs grew louder. The human stood still, watching Kelia carefully. They had expected hostility, threats, perhaps even an attempt on their life. They had not expected a show of support. The Torgeth clan leader, a brutish, tusked alien, growled in frustration. "And what do you suggest we do then?" He spat. "Welcome them as equals. Allow them to stand among us." Kelia shrugged elegantly. "Perhaps we should." The entire chamber erupted in noise. "Impossible. They are too dangerous. We cannot allow this." Kelia raised a hand, and slowly the chaos settled. She turned back to the human, her glowing blue eyes sharp. "Tell me something, human," she said. "Now that the Drakthar are gone, what does your species want?" The human considered her question carefully. Then they spoke. "We want to be left alone." Some senators laughed bitterly. Others narrowed their eyes, waiting for more. "We are not here to claim an empire," the human continued. "We are not here to impose our rule on others. We came here only because we know how this works." They turned, addressing the entire chamber now. "The moment you see a new power rise, the moment you see a threat you don't understand, you will come for us," they said. "You will fear us. You will plot against us. You will try to strike us down before we grow stronger." Their gaze hardened. "So I'm telling you now, don't." Another wave of silence. "If you leave humanity in peace," the human said, "we will have no quarrel with you. But if you come for us, if you attempt to do what the Drakthar did." They gestured to the blood-stained crown still sitting on the floor. "Then we both know how that ends." A chill spread through the room. Even the most aggressive warlords in the chamber paused, their plans shifting. The human was not asking for permission. They were setting the terms. For the first time, the galaxy was not looking at humanity as an insignificant species, For the first time, they saw humanity as something else entirely. Something unstoppable. Kelia's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "I believe the message is clear," she said. "The question now is, who among you is wise enough to listen?" The final standoff. The Senate chamber was no longer a place of debate. It was a battlefield of power and fear. The humans' warning had settled over the alien delegates like a storm cloud. Some species saw an opportunity, while others felt a threat that had to be eliminated before it was too late. The moment Kelia, the Velen ambassador, voiced her support, the tension reached a breaking point. And then, the room exploded into chaos. Shouts of protest, angry demands, warnings of war. They cannot be allowed to grow unchecked. If they could kill the Drakthar, they could kill any of us. Perhaps we should strike first. The humans stood still, watching the chaos unfold. They had expected this. The Xeraxian High Chancellor, who had remained eerily quiet, finally rose from his seat. His emerald scales glimmered under the chamber's artificial light, his cold reptilian eyes scanning the room. "Enough," he said. His voice was calm, but filled with authority. The room slowly fell silent. His gaze landed on the human. "You claim you do not seek power," he said. "You claim that humanity wishes only to be left alone." The human nodded once. "Then answer me this," the Chancellor continued. "If we truly let you be, if we do not interfere, do not plot against you, what happens when your species is no longer satisfied with isolation?" The question lingered in the air. The Chancellor's meaning was clear. What happens when humanity is no longer content with defense? What happens when they decide to expand? The human did not look away. "We are not conquerors," they said, "but we are survivors." A few murmurs rippled through the chamber. "You speak as though those are different things," the Chancellor observed. The human gave a small, knowing smile. "They are. For now." The room stiffened. For now. The Xeraxian Chancellor's expression remained unreadable. "And what," he asked, "would you say to those among us who believe humanity should be contained before it grows too strong?" The human's gaze shifted. They already knew. The Xalveric warlord had leaned forward, his claws tightening against the armrests of his throne. The Torgheth clan leader had reached for something beneath his robes, likely a hidden weapon. Several of the more aggressive factions had stopped whispering altogether, their bodies tense, waiting for an opening. This was no longer politics. This was the moment before the fight begins. The human sighed softly. "You can try," they said. The words were barely above a whisper, but they carried through the room like a shockwave. A challenge, a promise, a warning. The Torgheth clan leader snapped. "You dare speak to us this way?" He snarled, his three-tusked jaws curling back in fury. "You think a single victory makes your species invincible?" The click of a weapon activating filled the air. In one motion, the Torgheth leader pulled a concealed energy blade from his robe and lunged forward, aiming directly for the human's throat. For a brief moment, the entire Senate chamber froze. The attack had happened too fast. The guards stationed throughout the chamber had barely begun to react. The other delegates had not expected someone to break the peace so openly. But the human moved first. Before the blade could find its mark, they sidestepped the attack, fast, fluid, a movement practiced 1,000 times before. And then, with deadly precision, they caught the Torgheth leader's wrist, twisted sharply. A sickening snap echoed through the chamber. The blade clattered to the floor, followed immediately by a scream of pain. The Torgheth leader collapsed, clutching his shattered wrist. The chamber erupted into chaos again. Some delegates leaped back in shock. Others rose to their feet, shouts of alarm mixing with the tense crackle of charged weapons being drawn. The human did not move. They stood over their attacker, eyes calm, posture relaxed. Unshaken, unafraid. Then they knelt down beside the whimpering Torgheth leader. They spoke softly, but with terrifying clarity. "You misunderstand something," the human said. The Torgoth leader looked up, panting, his pain barely contained. The human's eyes held no hate, no anger, only a cold certainty. "We are not invincible," they said. "We are not gods." Their voice dropped lower. "But if you come for us, we will break you." The Senate chamber was now deathly quiet. Every faction, every leader, every warlord who had once seen humanity as an annoyance, as a species to be ignored or controlled, now saw something else entirely. They had seen a single human stand before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and not flinch. They had seen a challenge answered with precision, with finality, with no hesitation. They had seen what the Drakthar saw before they died. The Velen ambassador, still standing, still watching, let out a quiet breath, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "I believe," she said, breaking the silence, "that we now understand exactly what kind of species we are dealing with." She turned to the Xeraxian chancellor. "And I believe that any attempt to contain them would be unwise." The chancellor was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, reluctantly, he gave a single nod. "It would appear," he admitted, "that humanity has earned its place." Some of the more aggressive factions bristled at the words, but none spoke against them. Not after what they had just seen. The human exhaled, and finally stepped away from the fallen Torgoth leader. They said nothing more. They didn't need to. The message was clear. This was not an empire to be crushed. This was not a species to be ruled. This was humanity. And they would never kneel. Humanity's message. The Senate chamber was no longer a place of governance. It was a battlefield of unspoken wars, silent calculations, and new realities. The human had made their point. They had faced down warlords, silenced doubters, and shattered the arrogance of those who believed humanity to be nothing more than a minor species. The blood-stained crown of the Drakthar Emperor still sat at the center of the chamber, its presence a silent testament to everything that had changed. The balance of the galaxy had shifted, and humanity had forced the universe to acknowledge it. The final verdict. The Xeraxian High Chancellor turned, his gaze sweeping across the Senate chamber. He saw fear in some faces, admiration in others. He saw warlords gripping their seats, barely containing their anger. He saw opportunists, their minds racing with new possibilities. But most of all, he saw uncertainty. The galaxy had been predictable before today. Empires ruled, lesser species obeyed, and no one had dared to challenge the order of power. But now, standing in the center of it all, was a single human. And they had rewritten the rules. The Chancellor sighed. "It appears," he said carefully, "that humanity is no longer a minor species." The room remained silent, waiting for his next words. The Chancellor looked at the human. "You will not be opposed today," he said. "Earth will retain its sovereignty. No faction will move against you, for now." The human nodded slightly. They understood the message hidden beneath the words. Not today, but tomorrow. Tomorrow, the galaxy would still watch. Tomorrow, some would plot. But tomorrow was not today. And today, humanity had won. The Chancellor glanced at the fallen Torgoth leader, still cradling his broken wrist. His gaze shifted to Warlord Kavar, whose rage had simmered into something colder, more dangerous. And finally, he looked at Ambassador Kalia of the Velen Republic, who still stood with a quiet, knowing smile. A new power struggle had begun. One that no longer revolved around the Drakthar or the Dominion. One that revolved around humanity. The Chancellor stepped back. "This session is adjourned." And with that, the fate of the galaxy was sealed. The departure. As the alien delegates began to file out of the chamber, some still whispering, some casting wary glances at the human, Kalia approached. "You surprised them," she said. "That's not easy to do." The human studied her carefully. "And you?" Kalia smiled. "Oh, I was never surprised," she said. "I knew the Drakthar would fall eventually, but I never expected it would be humanity that ended them." The human said nothing. Kelia's eyes glowed faintly as she leaned in slightly. "Your people have done something remarkable," she murmured. "But I wonder, do they understand what they've just set into motion?" The human met her gaze. "We know exactly what we've done." Kelia laughed softly. "Good." She turned to leave, then paused. "You have a choice now," she said. "You can retreat into the shadows, try to remain hidden." She tilted her head. "Or you can take your place among the stars and change everything." The human watched her go. They already knew the answer. Earth had been forced into war, and it had survived. It had refused to kneel, refused to break. The Drakthar had thought themselves unstoppable. Now they were dust, and the rest of the galaxy had been warned. Humanity's message. The human took one last look at the chamber before turning toward the exit. As they walked, their words from earlier echoed in their mind. "Try us." It was not a threat. It was a truth. Because if anyone came for Earth again, if another empire believed humanity could be broken, they would suffer the same fate as the Drakthar. And next time, there would be no warnings, only war.